Well, good morning. Welcome once again to Elevenses. I'm Kevin Williams of Survival Skills Rider Training. I'm hoping very much that the glitch on the intro video there didn't affect your enjoyment. I don't know why that is. I keep checking and I can't find a solution to the problem here. So I don't know what the issue with that is. I'm just checking that everything seems to be going out all right. We don't have any viewers yet, so hopefully it's not going out. It is going out public. All right, so just everybody must be out riding their bikes at the moment. So anyway, let's carry on with the news today then. What have we got for you? Plenty of news. Cyberattack has shut down Suzuki's plant out in India. A woman hit by the police escort bike in London has sadly died. The bike ridden by teenagers who died in Cardiff in a crash earlier last week was actually a birthday present, which is rather sad. The Minister says that he's open to developing better policies for motorcycling in a meeting with the NMC. I'll talk about that. Norton have launched the V4CR Naked Café Racer. Ducati are updating their 950 Supersport, and a team from Massachusetts has actually managed to harvest electricity from the air, which is a fascinating development, and we'll have a quick look at that. And before we go on to today's discussion point, which is about the test rates and why do the test rate passes vary from town to town? Is it down to inconsistencies in the examining, or is it other factors? We'll have a look at all that today. Don't forget that you are able to access the previous week's articles on coffee. The lists of these are all down in the text which accompanies these videos on both Facebook and YouTube, so just have a look down below and you'll see all the links to all the videos and things that have gone out over the previous week. And one of the ones I just want to remind you about is that I actually launched the second of the new 60-second science series that went out on YouTube on Thursday. And basically what I'm doing here is I'm starting to look at a serious question: is motorcycling dangerous? The answer is, of course, revealed by science, so have a look at that. It's part one. I'll carry on answering that question because it's quite a complex one in the next video, which is due out on the coming Thursday, so have a look at that. The aim of the videos, as I say, is to show that it's not difficult to understand science, and actually it's quite needful that we do understand at least the basics, since science is with us every moment as we ride. You know, when we talk about balance and stability on two wheels, we're actually talking about mechanics and dynamics. We're exploiting things like Newton's laws of motion, actually. Principles of equilibrium, they tame the forces around the centre of mass, and they impact our control of the machine as we negotiate the roads. There's aerodynamics, that explains how we slip through the air. There's friction, that's the force that allows a motorcycle's tyres to grip the road surface. There's science behind energy, which helps us understand not only how bikes stop and go thanks to the power produced by the engine and the braking systems that stop us again. There's material science that helps us understand how clothing works. So I'll be looking at a bit of everything from, you know, in this series as we go along. So yeah, I think science is crucial, and if you don't believe me, well, you're welcome to go on the bike, jump on it and hope for the best. But if I was you, I would definitely be interested in these videos, so do take a look if you possibly can. Right, okay, links to, as I say, to all the items from the previous week are in the text which accompanies these videos. Just click down and have a look on that. Right, okay, now on with the news. Now the first one is actually quite an alarming story, because a cyber attack has actually shut down the production at the Suzuki manufacturing plant, which builds motorcycles and scooters for the Indian market. Now, it seems that production actually had to be stopped on May the 10th. The story has only just come out on a cyber security website. They've apparently lost production of at least 20,000 vehicles already. Suzuki has acknowledged what they described as a cybersecurity incident, but no details have been made available yet as to exactly what happened, and the company is continuing, it says, to investigate. Quote, "We are aware of the incident and have promptly reported the same to the concerned government department. The matter is currently under investigation, and for security purposes we are unable to provide further details at this point in time." Now, the news came out on the Bitdefender website. They specialise, as I say, in cybersecurity, and they say that although there are other ways in which such an attack could take place, it wouldn't be a surprise to them if the attack eventually is revealed to be ransomware related. In other words, pay up or we shut you down. So that's what's going on with Suzuki's plant out in India. Now, another rather sad piece of news. Helen Holland, who is the woman who was hit by the police motorcycle escorting Sophie, the Duchess of Edinburgh, through London after the coronation a fortnight ago, has sadly died from her injuries. Miss Holland was from Birchhanger in Essex. She was left in a coma following the collision, which happened at the junction of the West Cromwell Road and Warwick Road in Earl's Court on the 10th of May, and she'd been visiting her sister in London. Announcing her death, her son Martin Holland said his mother had suffered multiple broken bones and massive internal injuries. The cause of death was said to be irreversible brain damage. Buckingham Palace said the Duchess was deeply saddened and sent her deepest condolences to all the family, and Sophie was said to be speaking privately with Miss Holland's family. The police watchdog is continuing to investigate the collision. Now, another sad story, which I also brought up in the previous show, was about the 15-year-old boy and the 16-year-old boy who both died in a crash on a motorcycle on Monday evening in Ely in Cardiff. Now, the family of the 15-year-old, Harvey Evans, have stated that the Suron electric bike he was riding with his friend Carice Sullivan was actually an early birthday present, and he would have been 16 next month. Now, the rioting that followed the crash saw 2 cars burned out, at least 9 people arrested and 15 officers injured. Now, initial police statements, you'll recall that the teenagers were not being chased by police vehicles, were soon brought into question when CCTV footage showed the pair being followed by a police van, and an independent investigation is being carried out by the Office for Police Conduct. They're appealing for witnesses, and they say that the investigation is examining, quote, the nature of the police interaction with Carice and Harvey and the appropriateness of the officers' decisions and actions, and they're also considering whether or not the police officers' actions in the van constituted a pursuit, and whether the interaction between the officers and the boys was, quote, reported appropriately by the officers prior to and following the collision. So, unfortunately, a lot of questions there to be answered. Another story which leaves more questions unanswered, sadly, than it does answers them, is the Suella Braverman affair, the Home Secretary. Unless you've been living under a rock, you've no doubt heard that she has been cleared of breaching the ministerial code after she asked for a private speed awareness course. After she was caught speeding, the Prime Minister refused calls to launch an official investigation. And now it turns out that the Tory minister who served under Suella Braverman at the Home Office is among several high-profile MPs to have claimed back driving fines as MPs' travel expenses. The Independent newspaper has revealed that Amanda Soloway, she's now in industry with the Energy Department, claimed back an £80 fixed penalty notice issued in London in July 2020. Tory MP and Select Committee Chair Simon Hoare and the former Tory Vice Chair Bim Afalami. They also put their penalties on expenses, as did an SNP MP, Dave Dugan. The register of the MP's expenses shows that Mr Hoare, who's an MP for North Dorset, he claimed 4 times for £80 fines issued in November 2019. Mr Afalami, he's the MP for Hitchin and Harpenden, he claimed 2 £80 fines in December 2021. And Mr Dugan, the SNP MP for Angus, he claimed £160 fine in January 2022. Now, the expenses were actually approved and paid for by the Parliamentary Expenses Authority, the IPSA, Independent Parliamentary Standards Authority. But after being approached by the Independent, the authority has actually admitted that they were wrong to make these payments, and that they would be writing to the MPs to ask for the money to be repaid, and that they would reiterate the expenses rules to them. Now, Ms Soloway and Mr Afalami claimed the expenses were submitted in error, have now been repaid. The offices of the other MPs had not responded at the time of writing. So, all right, do set a reminder for 11s. It goes out on Wednesdays and Sundays at 11 AM. It's nearly always live. It's occasionally recorded. I suspect I will be doing a recorded show for next Sunday, as I'm down in Hastings for the day. If you do miss a show, you can catch up. You can find them on Facebook, but it's a lot easier to head to my YouTube channel, Survival Skills UK, and find them over there. So, all right, continuing with the parliamentary connection, representatives of the National Motorcyclist Council, the NMC, have met with Richard Holden MP, who is one of the Parliamentary Undersecretaries of State for Roads and Local Transport. So, meeting with the MP were Graham Collins, who's with the TRF, he's their CEO, Anthony Kildare, who's the CEO of IAM RoadSmart, Craig Carey-Clinch, who's the NMC's Executive Director, and Anna Z, who is a Director at the BMF. They all met with Mr Holden, who was reported to have said that he is, quote, open to developing better policies for motorcycling as part of the Department of Transport's approach to overall transport matters and the future of transport, unquote. The case for the advantages motorcycling brings to transport and society was put to Mr Holden by the members, who was also reported to have acknowledged that, quote, there was much he needed to learn about motorcycling, and he also apparently agreed that further work was needed on rider licensing, safety and various areas of regulation. Now, the benefits of motorcycling as a key step towards decarbonisation, they were being discussed, and one of the points that the panel made to him was that there was a need to avoid applying a one-size-fits-all approach to different road users in the phasing out of fossil-fuelled vehicles, and that a multi-technological approach would be needed. This basically, what they're saying in long-winded terms here, is that they want the internal combustion engine to continue to live after the deadline at which it's shut off, and they also want people, to be looking at the synthetic fuels and hydrogen power, both of which I have talked about at length on here, and I hope rather debunked as a source of fuel in any kind of volume. Now, meetings like this are always described as successful, but I've lost count of the number of times I've heard both the sort of needs to be done line and the want to learn about the problem line. I could honestly say that my memory of these things goes back to Peter Bottomley and the great leg protectors debacle. If you don't remember that, because you're too young, I'll go and just look up leg protectors and Peter Bottomley. You'll find out quite a lot about it. It may be a topic for another show, actually. Now, Bottomley was at the Department of Transport in 1986, where he was Minister of Roads until 1989. Now, to give you an idea of how long ago that was in real terms, Bottomley is now the longest serving MP, and he's therefore Father of the House. Now, the fact is, there have been no less than, wait for this, 28 parliamentary Undersecretaries of State for Transport since 20 2006. The Wikipedia list actually only goes back that far. Now, it's only a junior ministerial post, so what happens, of course, is that many MPs will jump ship when they're offered a better job as soon as they can. Often happens, of course, a mid-term ministerial shake-up. Others are replaced when there is a leadership change, and as we know, that has happened with monotonous regularity in the last couple of years. So in fact, with all the shenanigans that's been going on within the Tory party since 2016, the post of Undersecretary of State for Transport has been a revolving door. There have been no less than 20 different MPs acting in this role, and the fact is these undersecretaries are just junior ministers in the department. I guess it has to be done to, meet and talk, but it's genuinely hard to see how any meeting like this can make meaningful progress when the average life expectancy in this post is literally just a year or two. At least the other current incumbent, who is Baroness Veer of Norbiton, who I have mentioned on these columns on a number of occasions, she has at least been in the post since 2019, and that is actually at an age by the regular standard. So, realistically, I think we have to ask just how many times the NMC will be able to meet with Mr. Holden before he's moved on to another post, and how much time indeed can he actually devote to motorcycling issues along, within all his other commitments in that post. Will he really be able to make any effort to educate himself on motorcycle issues? You tell me. Comments welcome as always on that question and many more. Right, so let's have a look at some motorbikes, and I have a little logo which I've produced now to talk about motorbikes. So there we go. What have we got in the way of news on bikes? Well, the answer is that Norton have launched their V4CR Naked. So let's have a talk about that. Oops, that was a wrong button. Let's get the picture of the bike up on screen. There it is. That is the machine in question. As you can see, it has no fairing, so that's why it's the Café Racer. It's been described as the most powerful British cafe racer ever. The Naked V4 has just been launched. It's 185 horsepower from the motor, and it will set you back £41,999. You'll have to hurry though. Just 200 are set to be made. Now, it's the first brand new motorcycle actually produced by TVS owned Norton, and it follows on, of course, from the total re-engineering and the relaunch of the V4 SV Superbike, which was badly flawed, in fact so dangerous that it was issued with a notice to people to stop riding them, the unfortunate people who'd bought them. So that bike has been totally re-engineered into the model you see here, and it's out on sale now with the re-engineered V4 SV Superbike and the new generation Norton Commando 961. They were both relaunched at the end of last year. So what do you get for your money? Well, you get a liquid cooled 1200cc 72 degree V4 engine. As I say, many hundreds of parts have been changed. It's also slightly detuned from the Stuart Garner era bike, and now it produces a 185 horsepower at 12,000 RPM, and you get 125 newton meters of torque at 9,000 RPM. The exhaust system you see there is titanium. The machine itself is hand built at the company's Solihull headquarters. You get that precision engineered, it's aluminium frame, it's TIG welded by hand. It gets adjustable geometry via adjustable rake angle, steering offset and swing arm pivot, and many parts are made from aerospace grade aluminium, including the single side swinging arm, which you can't see from this side, the yokes themselves and foot pegs. So I think it's actually quite a pretty motorcycle. There it is out on the country lanes, and I think actually it's rather gorgeous. Would I own one? That's a good question. What other interesting things are there to tell you about it? Well, the fuel's actually under the seat in a carbon fibre 15-litre fuel tank. It's Kevlar reinforced. Body panels that there are on the bike are also carbon fibre. The Manx Platinum option gets forged aluminium OZ racing wheels. The second option, the V4 CR Carbon, actually gets carbon fibre BST wheels. What else do you get? Adjustable Öhlins suspension front and rear, Brembo brakes, LED lights, keyless ignition, and a full colour 6-inch TFT display. Rider aids, quick shifter, auto blipper, a sophisticated lean angle sensitive traction control, and 3 engine modes: wet, road and sport. Now, Dr. Robert Henschel, who is the CEO of Norton Motorcycles, he said the Norton V4CR is a raw expression of impeccable design and intoxicating performance. We've taken the engineering of the V4SV, stripped back the outer shell to ensure the rider gets a truly uninhibited motorcycling experience. The V4CR is the first completely new model we've built. Our engineering and design teams have been meticulous in their approach, from initial sketches to concept production through to the finishing final touches. The bike is the culmination of all our learning and investment over the last 3 years, and we are delighted we can now share this taste of Norton's future. If you want to register interest in the bike, head to the official Norton Motorcycles website, which is nortonmotorcycles.com. Right, okay, as a slightly more affordable option, here is one of a pair of updated Ducatis. Let's have a closer look at that. There it is. The bikes are the Supersport 950 and the Supersport 950S. This is the Star Stripe livery, which I believe is on the S model. The machines are based around the Testa Stretta twin cylinder engine, and you get 110 horsepower at 9,000 rpm and 68 foot-pounds, 93 newton meters of torque at 6,500, so a little bit lower revving than the V4. They're said to be able to offer a high level of comfort for both daily riders and touring enthusiasts by combining versatility, comfort and thrills. Changes from the previous model, because you get a hydraulic clutch with an adjustable lever. Absolutely essential if you've got a hydraulic clutch, frankly, because you can't adjust the cable on a hydraulic clutch. I had one on my Yamaha FZ many years ago, and it was always a long stretch, and dogleg levers only go so far. The gearbox, that's been modified. It supposedly facilitates easier engagement of neutral when the bike is stationary and helps to ensure precise gear engagement, which I would say is a fairly useful feature for any gearbox. For 2024 you get updated colour ranges for the Supersport 950S, said to pay tribute to the Panigale V4 with the headlights, the fully adjustable Öhlins Falcon shock, passenger seat cover on the S model, and glossy black wheel trims. Rather more useful, I would have said, is the height adjustable windscreen. Now, as usual, of course, with these things, the base bike can be enhanced. There are sport and touring accessory packages which are purchased separately. Now, both bikes get a trellis frame. The engine's a stressed load-bearing part of that, which is said to reduce weight. And the Supersport 950 does come in at 184 kilos, 407 pounds or thereabouts. So even with fuels and other liquids, it should weigh in under 210 kilos, I'd have thought, which is pretty light these days. Excuse me. You get the now usual electronics package: ABS, cornering, ABS that is, traction control, wheelie control, quick shifter, and the 3 riding modes: sport, touring and urban on this occasion. The Supersport 650 base model gets a new seat with improved padding and a flatter profile, which is said to offer plenty of room for a passenger, something often missing on modern bikes. The height of the bars is said to allow a sporty riding position without too much strain on the wrists, while the foot pegs are said to be positioned so as not to fatigue the knees. Now, what's the price of this? Well, I've seen one report that suggests 13,895 in the S trim and 12,296 for the standard Ducati Supersport 950. But since the US dollar price for the S model is just over $18,000, I doubt that's actually the correct price for the 2024 model. It's more likely it's the previous model, which has been around since 2017. My guess, I can't substantiate this, but it is a guess, is £16,000 would probably be closer. Right, okay, we do have a comment. Who's said here? Paul's just looked in and said it isn't surprising that Groundhog Day is par for the course with such a high turnover of government ministers. Kudos for the Riders Group's representatives for their patience when forced to repeat the same message over and over again. Yes, I suppose I should give some credit where credit is due. If you've got to go and say the same things to a different person every year or two, it must get very frustrating. But you know, I do wonder how much progress these things really make, which is the sad point of it. Okay, so if we aren't going to go for a full ICE future, if we're not even going to go for partial ICE retention in the motorcycle market, what are we going to do? Well, as I've said, electricity would seem to be the likely way forward. The challenges of hydrogen production in the quantity necessary looks out of reach, frankly. And as for sort of biofuels and synthetic fuels that are being touted around as the solution to everything, forget it. They're just not going to happen in the quantity that we're needed. They might power the old race series, but that really is going to be about it. But there is light at the end of the corridor. Whether it turns out to be a corridor we'll get down and negotiate to the end of is another matter. But a team of engineers from the University of Massachusetts has just shown that nearly any material can be turned into a device that continually harvests electricity from humidity in the air. Now, this is really quite an important breakthrough. Researchers have described what they call the generic airgen effect as the ability that nearly any material has to be engineered in a way that it needs nanopores. I'll come on to what those are in a moment. But they can harvest what they say is cost-effective, scalable, interruption-free energy. And the secret lies in being able to manufacture the material with nanopores, which are less than 100 nanometers in diameter. Zhang Yao, who's the assistant professor of electrical and computer engineering in the College of Engineering at University of Massachusetts at the Amherst site. He's the paper's senior author, and he said, quote, "The air contains an enormous amount of electricity. Think of a cloud, which is nothing more than a mass of water droplets. Each of those droplets contains a charge, and when the conditions are right, the cloud can produce a lightning bolt. But we don't know how to reliably capture electricity from lightning. What we've done is create a human-built, small-scale cloud that produces electricity for us predictably and continuously so we can harvest it." Now, how big is 100 nanometers? Well, it's less than 1,000th of the width of a human hair. Now, Yao and his colleagues, they realized that what they could do was design this electricity harvester from a thin layer of material filled with these 100 nanometer nanopores that they let water molecules pass from one side to the other. But because the pores are so tiny, the water molecules actually bump into the pore's edge as they pass through the thin layer. Now, what this means is that the upper part of the layer would be bombarded by many more charge-carrying water molecules than the lower part. Presumably the water molecules sort of filter their way down to the bottom of it. and it creates a charge imbalance. Basically, you've got a positive charge on one side, you've got a negative charge on the other, and that in effect is a battery. And it runs as long as there is any humidity at all in the air. The water droplets, the state of charge is natural, so you can just keeping pulling energy out of the air. Now, since the humidity is ever present, the harvester can run 24/7, it can run night and day, it runs regardless of whether the wind blows or not, and basically it solves one of the major problems of both wind and solar technology, that they only work under certain conditions. Now, since the thickness of each layer of this AirGen device is only a fraction of the width of a human hair, what it means is you can actually build up thousands upon thousands of layers by stacking them on top of each other, and you can scale up the device enormously without changing the actual footprint that you take. So what they're saying is that an AirGen device could easily be built developing kilowatt level power for general electrical usage. So if this can genuinely be scaled up out of the laboratory at an affordable cost, it really could be a game changer. So really interesting technology there. Okay, so before we move on to today's discussion point, don't forget, if you want to support Elevenses, and your support is very welcome, you can just pop over to my coffee page. The link is going across the bottom of the screen there, and if you support me to the tune of £3, you buy me a coffee, and that helps the shows come to you, but it also gives you access to hundreds and hundreds of better biking articles. It's the biggest resource on the internet that I am aware of, all there for just £3. If you're a subscriber and you repeat your payment on a monthly basis, there are even more options open to you, and the occasional special gift as well, to just thank you for your support. Right, finally, in today's discussion point, I'm going to sort of try and tackle the question which people often ask: why are test pass rates for motorcyclists different depending on which part of the country you take your motorcycle test at? Now, ever since I can remember, there have been people trying to find the towns with the best pass rate, because they then think that the test must be easier there. And the latest to do this is the Compare the Market insurance website. They've taken a look at the last 5 years at DVSA data to find out which test centres around the mainland have the highest and lowest pass rates for bikes. So here's the good news. According to Compare the Market, if you live in Southampton, Berwick-on-Tweed or Stoke-on-Trent, that's where the pass rates are highest. Southampton reaches almost 92% of all tests taken being passed. But if you go to Hamilton, Glasgow or Kirkham, they are the lower end of the scale. Just 59.9% of the tests are passed in Kirkham, and the other two were just over 60%. They also found that April seems to be the best month to take your test. May and July were also good, as rather surprising was February. Entirely unsurprisingly, the worst months are October, November and December, when the weather is often grim and it's getting dark in the evenings too. But don't panic too much, the difference is only a couple of percentage points. So why the disparity between the test centres? Well, here's the interesting thing: it actually varies. So you can look at a different set of data and you'll get a different answer. Basically, Bennett Social looked at the same best place to take your test, and they looked at data in 2021, which is in the middle, of course, of the Compare the Market data, and they found that Workington had the highest pass rate. 96.2% of tests taken there were passed, closely followed by Aberdeen South, where it was 93.8%. Again, at the bottom, we come to, again, a different selection of towns. We found Uxbridge bottom there, 50.5% of riders passing, Gloucester 56.6, Erith 58.6. So you'll notice they are all different test centres. The only one to appear in both lists was actually Glasgow Shield Hall, where 54.1% 1% of riders pass the Mod 2 test. So I actually went and dug out for myself the latest DVSA data and took a look. Now, at a glance, I certainly haven't done a statistical analysis on this. It does look as if certain towns do have better and worse pass rates compared with the average, but the variation basically is fairly unpredictable at the same test centre. Some test centres have a very consistent pass rate. Others, it does rebound as much as 20% at one test centre I looked at. So it's really not quite as cut and dried as these articles make out. You certainly can't rely on them to head off and get an easy bike test. So why is the variation? Well, one claim often made is that examiners aren't consistent. And it's not surprising based really if you think about it, when somebody comes back with and gets handed a fail certificate rather than the hoped for pass, they often blame the examiner. I can remember one trainee coming back ranting about how all he'd done was forget to cancel his indicator. It just happened that he'd done it approaching a junction where there was a car waiting to pull out. Not surprisingly, the examiner had to actually tell him over the radio to turn the signal off. Now, that's a serious fault on test. It might be a minor mistake to forget to cancel the signal, but it can have very, very serious consequences if the car does assume that you're turning off and they pull out. So when the examiner takes that action, tells you to cancel it, that counts as a serious fault and is an instant fail. Now, quite frankly, I've had near misses myself when I've forgotten to cancel a signal. Not too many, thankfully, in my past, and so I made my own views on this pretty clear to the trainee that it was a bad mistake and one that riders really do have to be alert to. And just because the driver didn't pull out this time doesn't mean it won't happen next time. It's not a trivial error. Many riders who fail tend to think the examiners are too tough, but all they're looking for is a rider who's in reasonable control of the machine. They're not looking for an expert bike handler, but they are making the assessment of whether the rider is actually aware of what's happening around them and whether the rider is making good riding decisions. You know, you get up to 15 driving faults, as they're called, minor errors, on the test. And you're out on the road for about 30 minutes. So look at it from that perspective. You'll have one mistake every 2 minutes and you could still scrape through with a pass. Now, something else that's often examiners are often accused of as being inconsistent, and the DVSA, they do assess examiners regularly. They aim to keep examiners as consistent as they possibly can, but you can never completely eliminate personalities. I still remember one examiner who had a particular bee in his bonnet about riders on direct access courses getting on with it and getting up to the speed limits on faster roads. Another who tested in the same area was a little more relaxed on the sort of speed and acceleration thing, but they both wanted to see riders who were confident enough to open their bikes up on the 70 dual carriageway that the test went along, and if conditions were right and if traffic allowed, to get the bike up towards 70 miles per hour. And I knew that what they wanted to see one week, they'd want to see the next two. And honestly, in all the time I was a motorcycle trainer, I can only honestly say that there was one examiner that was totally unpredictable, and you know, my heart genuinely sank when I saw it was him taking the test. But thankfully, very, very thankfully, he retired within a very short period after I started. So I didn't lose too many test passes to him. But honestly, I can say that all the other examiners I worked with were pretty damn fair. If they deemed a rider had failed, and when they explained the circumstances for their decision, I really didn't question that very often. Now, of course, there are human standards to try to smooth out, and the same goes for the test on the roads that it's run on. It's never entirely possible to ensure that the roads that a rider will encounter in one city or town will pose exactly the same level of difficulty as they do in another. But the DVSA do put a lot of effort into doing the best they possibly can, but it can't ever be a completely level playing field. I mean, even across the test centres that I have experience with in the south of England, southeast of England, there were certain test centres that threw up unique problems that you wouldn't and couldn't experience elsewhere. And one that springs to mind immediately was the slip road just outside Folkestone, where you joined the A20. Now, this was a very fast stretch of dual carriageway. It was very busy because basically it led straight out of the port of Folkestone, Channel Tunnel and all that, and it led straight on to the M20. So there was a very short stretch of road, about half a mile, that was all it was, where the riders came on at one exit and left at the next immediately before it turned into the motorway. So effectively you were dealing with motorway traffic at motorway speed. Now there were other test areas where there were dual carriageways with various speed limits, but none were quite as scary as that one, where it was quite a short slit road. And if the test was being taken by 125, and the examiners would take 125s out onto that road, you really had to get a bit of a move on and do the best you possibly could on a bike with a top speed less than the speed limit when pulling out onto that road. And of course there are small rural towns where there will be no dual carriageways. Even the town centre in small rural towns is unlikely to pose anything like the challenge, for example, of riding out of a big test centre in a city. I mentioned Erith on that list as having a poor pass rate. Well, I took riders to test in Erith in southeast London on a number of occasions, and it really wasn't a pleasant experience. There was some very, very aggressive driving and some very difficult junctions which had to be dealt with as well. By contrast, Folkestone in Kent was actually relatively quiet and benign, that A20 slip road aside. So there's one final obvious variable, and that's the riders. Now, it would be interesting to know which tests were taken, A2 or full A. I haven't had a chance to look about that. More interesting still would be to know how much training the riders had actually taken for their courses. Now, my experience of working for a number of different schools which had different approaches to putting riders onto courses in terms of length, was that whilst a longer, more relaxed course doesn't guarantee a better result, if similar riders with their sort of basic level of skill were assessed and put onto longer courses, generally speaking, they had a better chance of passing. I certainly worked for a couple of schools that tested at the same test centres, so with the same examiners, so you can actually kind of eliminate that as a variable. And it was usually the shorter courses with the less experienced riders that one of these schools specialised in, and they sort of thought basically it was a way of getting people to pick them rather than somebody else who wanted to put them on a longer, more expensive course. It simply didn't give me the time to run the trainee up to standard, to give them the experience of the complexities of the test area. Most towns have at least 5 test routes for motorcycles, and, big towns, and it means you simply can't get around every possible hazard and look at the problem. And some of the problems really do demand a lot of time to actually cover. Gillingham, for example, is one big multi-lane roundabout with lights all the way around it. You can approach it from 4 different directions. The 5th exit is a superstore. The only way to get around that one was actually to learn from each direction where each lane goes, because none of the approaches are consistent in terms of lane markings. You can be in one lane from one direction, it will take you to one exit. If you approach it from the opposite direction and you're in the same number of lane across the junction, you'll go somewhere completely different. So you have to learn that one by rote. You can not make sense of the signs very easily, and the road markings are always under a queue, and there are of course plenty of opportunities for drivers themselves to get it wrong and end up cutting across lanes, which could surprise the biker. With all the best planning in the world, I could never spend enough time on that roundabout on the shorter courses. So my advice, if you're waiting to take your test, don't try to cut corners on the cost of course by cutting the cost of the length of the course, you will get what you pay for when it comes to bike training in terms of instruction. And frankly, you may be able to hack around a field on a paddock bike, but it's really not going to equip you for riding on the road. So, okay, I've left that banner going all the way through there, but never mind. That's it for today. Thank you again for looking in. Always appreciate those people who make the effort to watch live or the recording. So if you are out there today, it's another nice looking day, not quite as sunny as yesterday, but here in London yesterday was absolutely stunning. But if you are out there and you're enjoying the weather, do stay shiny side up.